I'm joined today by Christina Hoff Sommers, who's a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. It's really great to have you on. You know, a lot of people, when we started covering Gamergate, started saying you should really have Christina Hoff Sommers on. She's a feminist and she has a different perspective and so on and so forth. So let's start kind of at the broadest point. How did Gamergate first come to your attention?
It came to my attention almost by accident. At the very moment Gamergate erupted, I read on a number of websites about a new study that showed that middle-aged women were the new gamers, the dominant demographic. And that struck me as very odd. And I noticed also that the writers in Salon and Dot Daily and various places seemed very invested in this finding. They seemed to be glorying in the demise of the gamer. And so I looked more carefully at the study and found, yes, indeed, women are a new and vibrant and vital demographic. However, what most people think of as sort of the highly committed, passionate gamer that will play many hours a week, and it's a critical part of their, identity. That was still a lot of mostly young men and a small percentage of very, committed young women, but mostly it was not what the news stories were saying. So I just thought that something was amiss, that there was a lot of hostility towards this group, and that piqued my interest.
And in the context of this, there's so many people who every time it seems they email me and it somehow relates to something you've said or something you've done, they always say, and you should know that Christina is a feminist. Why do you think that self-description of you being a feminist has become so central to your involvement in Gamergate?
Here's why. I am an old-fashioned equity feminist. I call it freedom feminist now, but an equity feminist wants for women what she wants for everyone. Fair treatment, no discrimination. In my view, the majority of gamers are probably equity feminists. Now, they are not hardline radical feminists who believe that there's a patriarchal conspiracy devouring the women of the nation. That's a special point of view found mostly on the campus. And I have been, sparring with those feminists and trying to reason with them for years. And what I saw was that a lot of otherwise very reasonable people were being called all sorts of names, the gamers, because they weren't towing the line on hardline radical feminism. So, and by the way, if you ask people, are you a feminist? The latest poll I saw, about 17% will say yes. A majority say no. They say they believe in equality, but they don't identify with the name, because the name has been hijacked by a fairly, I would say, adamant group of people. And so I just wanted to let the gamers know you can still be a feminist and but not believe in conspiracy theories about the patriarchy.
And do you believe that modern feminists, by and large, believe conspiracy theories about the patriarch, as you mentioned? What percentage of modern feminists do you think have those views?
Not all of them. There's a wide range of views. But if you look at a typical feminist theory class, which I have done, I've even taught such a class, what you find is that fairly radical views, which derived more from Marxism or the writings of Michel Foucault and French philosophy, that those theories are dominant. That's what young women learn. Liberal classical feminism that I believe in is often just given short shrift, and they even the great feminist foremothers like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, they say that how limited they were and inadequate, and they are treated somewhat disrespectfully. So all of that is alarming to me as a scholar and a feminist. So I do think that the dominant, let's put it this way, that the organized women's movement, as well as the blogs and the various journals and so forth, they are coming from what I would describe as a fairly hardline view.
All right, so that gives us just a ton of stuff to work with now. And in the interest of doing all of this in kind of the time we have, I'll just start walking through, I think, the different angles we should look at. You talked about this more hardline feminist view as being particularly predominant on college campuses. And interestingly enough, there are many serious academics. I have a list, I think, of 20 in front of me, who seem to think that you're actually not a feminist without getting into the specifics of whether we're saying hardline feminists or conspiratorial feminists or equity feminists. Broadly speaking, I've got 20 or so publications in front of me where we have pretty serious academics that say you're simply not a feminist. You're calling yourself one, but you're not. What do you think their motivation is in making those assertions?
Well, if you go back to the early 90s, I was a feminist academic in good standing. I was invited to feminist conferences. I refereed articles for feminist journals. All of that changed rather abruptly when I wrote a book called Who Stole Feminism, in which I defended equity feminism and took issue with what I thought was a very eccentric agenda of my colleagues in feminist philosophy. I was excommunicated from the Church of Feminism on that when that book came out. Now, some feminists supported me. I had wonderful mail from people like Erica Jong, the author of Fear of Lying, and Nadine Straughan, president of the ACLU. There have always been classical equity feminists. They're still there. They're still in the academy. But the dominant, most vocal group did not view my calls for moderation. They did not appreciate that, and they considered me having committed an act of heresy. And so I think you may be hearing from them. They are still quite vocal, quite opinionated, quite passionate, and quite intolerant.
Yeah, I mean, whoever we talk about, whether it's, Kristen J. Anderson or Michael Kimmel, or, whether we look at Elaine Cartwright and Lisa Sol Cahill, whoever it is, right? Any of these individuals, do you believe that they're sort of exercising a vendetta against you because you didn't sort of play along?
Oh, no. I mean, many of them probably don't know much about me, but I think they do feel that when you criticize there are certain ways you're permitted to criticize mainstream feminism. If you do it from the inside, they have all sorts of bitter feuds.
Okay, let me pause there just for a second, because I'm getting confused on the terms we're using. So let me just ask for a clarification. Before, you talked about hardline feminism as this sort of extremist and conspiratorial movement obsessed with patriarchy.
Right.
But now you referred to, it sounds like that same thing, you're now characterizing it as the more mainline or predominant feminism. So which is it?
No, wait.
Is the hard? Let me just. If I'm asking the question wrong, I'll let you correct it.
Okay.
Is the hardline movement the predominant and mainstream one, or is it this fringe group that is trying to impose its will on more moderate feminism?
In the academy, the extreme is the mean. In the academy, the extreme is the norm. Now, if you look at the women's movements, the National Organization for Women, the American Association of University Women, the National Women's Law Center, there you find they are more hardline egalitarians. It's very complicated. There are many, many different schools, but they share the view that we live in a patriarchal society and that every institution bears the impress of patriarchy. I don't think of American society as patriarchal. I think of it as largely that the women's movement was a huge American success story, that women are liberated. There are still problems, of course. We still need a reasonable, reality-based feminism. But I part company with a majority of, I would say, self-identified academic feminists.
The problem I'm kind of having with the definitions you're using is that you're sort of saying you don't agree with a version of feminism that you are yourself defining, which I don't think is the predominant view. So I'll just give you an example based on what you just said to kind of elucidate my point here. You said there's this movement of feminism which is obsessed with the idea that every aspect of our society and government is patriarchal, etc., and that you don't agree that that's the case. I've not really met anyone, though, who actually thinks that every element of our society and government is patriarchal and sexist. I've mostly met people who say, here are some particular ways in which that's true.
Well, I don't know who you've met, and I'm on the campus all the time, and I read the feminist theory textbooks, and I have yet to encounter a text that doesn't endorse a rather conspiratorial theory about the patriarchy. And these texts often come with a set of statistics, which, in my opinion, are demonstrably false or exaggerated, but the statistics reinforce the paranoia. There is a reason right now why on campus we have outbreak of a kind of fanaticism, of calls for censorship, the trigger warning, the safe spaces. Where do you think that came from? Now, you're denying that what I'm describing exists, but there are manifestations everywhere. Why do you
No, but so let's be clear. I'm not denying that it exists. What I deny is your caricature as the most extreme version of feminism that you describe being the predominant reality and one which you're kind of distancing yourself from. It feels a little bit like creating a sort of straw man and then saying, I'm not involved in that. Well, there's not that many people that are.
I wish it were a straw man, because it's so real, and it's in the texts. It's in the, and if you try to correct one of the texts, which I did, I would invite your readers to look for an example of what I'm talking about. At the Chronicle of Higher Education, I had a debate in the pages of the Chronicle with a feminist theorist named Nancy Lemon, who had produced, from Berkeley Law, she's there teaching, she produced the leading textbook on domestic violence. It was full of mistakes, irrational claims, and I wrote to her and told her about them, and then the book went into its third edition. Domestic Violence Law went into its third edition with all the mistakes. Now, I had the exchange. I think most people were shocked by what she was claiming and how indifferent she was to the truth. And I do believe that there are far more Nancy Lemons teaching in our universities. And as I've said before, in the early 90s, there was a big debate about feminism. And there were people I like very much, like Wendy Kaminer and Ellen Willis and Carol Vance. And these were women who were worried about Catherine McKinnon, Andrea Dworkin, about their influence, of the Mordorkanites, as they're sometimes called. We won the argument, but the other side quietly assumed the majority of the assistant professorships. So we have a professoriate that tends to buy into the party line. Are they as extreme as Catherine McKinnon? Well, they've moved on to other things, but the extremism is very much there, and there is no other way to explain this outbreak of zealotry on the campus today.
Okay, but as you said, you actually had this. My feeling is that it is quite common, but so it is you admit it's your speculation.
Actually, there's been a fairly good study. It was the Independent Women's Forum commissioned a feminist historian to do a review of the 5 leading feminist textbooks. And she found them filled. It was Christine. Her name was Christine Rosen, PhD in women's studies from MRA, I believe, or maybe it's feminist history. Anyway, Christine Rosen did this review, and she found the textbooks to be relentlessly biased and full of untruths. She called them sisterly sophistries. That's the closest we have to an analysis of the content of feminist theory courses. But let me tell you something else. I'm operating, there's me, and there are a few independent dissident feminists, Camille Paglia, Kathy Young, Wendy Kaminer. We're individuals. We are confronting a network of organizations. I really call it a juggernaut. There are thousands of them, women's institutes and think tanks and women's studies departments, marching in sisterly solidarity, more or less, though they have their feuds. And they have the resources to produce volumes, avalanche of studies, but because they don't allow real dissenters inside, because it's a single party system, because women who are libertarian, conservative, heaven forbid, traditionally religious, not invited to the table. In my case, I'm just a moderate feminist, kind of a mainstream, more liberal than conservative. And I am not welcome.
Okay, but at the same time, though, the American Enterprise Institute is by no means a liberal organization, and some of the specifics of what you're saying do fall in line with more right-wing ideals implied in what you just said. And I'll be very specific here and allow you to respond. You said that one of the groups that is discriminated against by feminism are those who are devoutly religious. And that is a now common theme that we are seeing for the last 8 or so years, this idea of Christian persecution in the US, something which is by and large a non-factor, non-existent. You believe that Christians as a group or the religious as a group are discriminated against by feminism?
What I believe is that there are women who I know who are galvanized around women's issues. They would like to do something about violence against women. They would like to be active in global feminism, but they may be Catholics or they may be Orthodox Jews, and they find themselves very unwelcome. So I'm not talking about discrimination against Christians. I'm saying traditionally religious people, libertarian women, as I mean, look at someone like Laura Kipnis. She's a libertarian feminist with very good credentials at Northwestern, and she recently wrote in the Chronicle of Higher Education a piece taking issue with the call-out culture and the trigger warnings, and sort of a pro-sex feminist. And she has faced derision and sort of massive protest, and students want her investigated. Now, if all of these mainstream, sensible women in the academy existed, where are they? Why aren't they coming out and supporting Laura Kipnis?
Yeah, I don't. I don't know that much specifically on the Catholic side, but the example you gave as far as Orthodox Jews, the predominant reason why Orthodox Jewish women are not participating in any kind of women's rights movement is not because feminism is keeping them out. It's because the Orthodox Jewish communities see those women as subservient. Most of them are not even allowed to go to college, and they are. I mean, that I think that the one specific example I know.
Jewish relatives, they go to college. They are professors, and there is a thriving women's movement within Orthodox Judaism.
Yes, there's no question that there is not you're absolutely right. But here in New York City, with what's going on with the Orthodox and Hasidic communities in Brooklyn and in other areas, we're talking about a very different scenario. It's not because of feminism that they're not involved.
Don't confuse Orthodox with Hasidism. And even in Hasidism, I suggest you go back and look at a wonderful article written many years ago in the New Yorker. A feminist writer went to Borough Park, or parts in Brooklyn, to study the Hasidic Jews, and she thought she was going to encounter these, sort of drudges or Stepford wives from the 9th century. And she was surprised. She found these thriving women with all these projects. I remember she said more good works than Eleanor Roosevelt. So I think we have to be careful. That's another point that I make that seems to upset some of my colleagues, is that I think we have to give women the benefit of the doubt and not be so matronizing about women's choices and women's lives. We live in a free society. Women may choose. I think they do choose to be Orthodox, but they could still be at the table. They could still, if they are academics and they are feminists, but they happen to be traditional Catholics or Orthodox Jews, I would welcome them at the table.
Okay, so I think we may be talking about slightly different populations, and thus we're having a little bit of kind of confusion around terms, but fair enough.
Typing the Jewish women, but never mind.
No, I don't think I am. I mean, if there's any population that I've been studying, I'm only 31, but for almost 20 years, if there's any population that I've been more involved with and academically studying, it is the various Jewish populations around the world. So I don't think that's where we're kind of having a miscommunication.
Oh, I will leave that.
Let's talk a little bit about equity feminism, okay? The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy describes equity feminism as concerned with government discrimination, not discrimination with regard to businesses or individuals. And there's even some quotes if we were to look at the Stanford philosophy definition on this. What is your position on that as an equity feminist? Should equity feminism only be concerned with government-established discrimination against women, or is business and personal discrimination against women also important?
Oh, all of it. I mean, equity feminism is a philosophy of personal and political emancipation, and it applies to all walks of life. And it developed out of the European Enlightenment, and at its core is the idea that women, like men, deserve to be, pursue the right to pursue happiness and be granted equal dignity, respect, liberty. And I think that it is a powerful tradition I think we are very fortunate to our forefathers and foremothers who developed the human rights movement and the various liberation movements. I'm a strong proponent of the gay rights movement, even the trans movement, because I think these are authentic liberation movements. I think what's happening today with what I call hardline feminism, or in my more technical writings, gender feminism, because they believe in the sex-gender system, which I question, they are not really coming out of the European Enlightenment and celebrating liberation, because they don't think liberation is enough. They really do want to, I think, engage in social engineering so people are more the way they think they should be rather than the way they may want to be.
So on this particular issue, you're sort of at odds with someone like Wendy McElroy, an equity feminist, who has written that her only concern is discrimination from the government, and that if the government granted full equal rights to women, that she would stop writing altogether about women's issues.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if that's not a caricature of her view, but if that's what the dictionary of Stanford, I mean, I don't know who wrote.
That's a quote from what she wrote in 1998.
Well, she may have changed, but that's fine. But she's probably perhaps more libertarian than I don't know. You'll have to ask her.
Okay, so but your view differs. Assuming that what the quote I read is accurate, your view differs from hers as to what equity feminism should be concerned with. Yeah. You believe it should go beyond just government discrimination.
Yes, and I mean, I think it's relevant to one's daily life and to one's personal relationships. It's just a philosophy of freedom, and freedom matters in all domains.
Okay, so let me give you one example of something that has come up with a guest on the show and get you to weigh in, and it might help the audience kind of place where you are philosophically on this issue. We interviewed someone named Karen Straughan on the program a little while ago. She's a self-described men's rights activist. She was also interviewed by my friend Cenk Uygur over on the Young Turks. And during that interview, Karen said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but I think I'm doing an accurate job. It was a 5-minute exchange, so I'll paraphrase it, that the importance of women voting has sort of been overstated historically, and that women were, number one, not that interested in the idea of voting, and number two, that it was a relatively small group of activists who sort of placed that idea in the minds of women, and that women voting is not even really that useful of a tool to achieve change. So when I saw that, I heard really the two main things to restate. Women were not even really that interested in getting the right to vote, broadly speaking. And number two, it's not even really that important for women to express their opinion by voting. What's your reaction to that? Is that a point of view you would be on board with?
Oh, absolutely not. Voting is critically important, and women struggled and suffered greatly in the pursuit, and we should all be enormously grateful. I will say that Ms. Straughan has a point. Initially, the suffrage movement met with a lot of resistance from women. And if you go back and read the notes and memoirs of Susan B. Anthony, at times she was so frustrated. She once even said, and I'm paraphrasing, that that our big problem are the women. The men would go along if the women would join our side. There was a struggle. And the women's movement, this is a point I like to make in my lecture, there has always been, when women have made the greatest progress, there have been two streams, a more conservative and a more radical. When you have both streams, women make progress. Now that's what happened in the suffrage movement. The suffrage movement had stalled a little bit, but along came Frances Willard, who was from the Christian Temperance Union, but she turned it into a kind of activist organization, but she brought along mainstream women.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that you do agree only on the historical fact that there was a point at which women were not united around the desire and importance of gaining the right to vote. But beyond that, you seem to have no agreement whatsoever with Ms. Straughan.
No, I haven't heard that view before.
No, I would review the interview, Karen Straughan and Cenk Uygur on the Young Turks. Last thing I want to talk about, and this is kind of the most recent thing, you spoke at Oberlin College, and there were protests there which alleged that you were a rape denialist. And I looked at the research, and my view is that you haven't so much denied that rape is a problem, but more that you've said the data on rape have been overstated. Am I right on that?
Of course, rape is a problem. Rape is a horrific, terrifying crime. And that's why we should be very careful We should have the best possible policies. We should be as protective as we can of young women, consistent with due process for young men. And I find that we're failing both right now on the campus.
Okay, so with regard to the studies around rape, though, I've read that you've been critical of some studies. For example,
many studies, yes.
Let me give you one example, and we'll kind of delve into it. There's a 2011 CDC study which concluded that about 1.3 million women had been raped in 2010. And you felt that that study was simply wrong, and you alleged, for example, that nobody at the CDC had actually been interviewed and said all of the things that were reported. For example, you said no one interviewed by the CDC was asked if they had been raped or sexually assaulted. But that's not actually true.
Wait. No, that's not right. The CDC asked an artful series of questions.
Right.
They didn't ask if you were raped, but they asked things that anyone would agree were raped. But then along with those questions, they included questions that were ambiguous. Let me tell you something else about that study.
Yeah.
It also found that 1.2 million men had been forced to penetrate someone in 2010. That's an odd finding.
It is. Okay. But so do you contend that none of the data, the 1.3 million and the 1.2 million about men, that none of those numbers are accurate? Or what's your contention?
They seem to be so different from what's reported in the, from the Bureau of Justice Statistics. The Bureau of Justice Statistics finds, I don't know, they keep changing the number because they keep recalculating it, but it's, something like 100, I think it was 90,000 or 200,000, not 1.3 million. And that 190 or 200,000 is based not only on rape, but it's attempted rape and what they call sexual assault, which includes groping and grabbing and, sexual. So they...
Yeah, the problem I have, and if I'm just wrong about this, correct me, but I've seen you numerous times compare the results from from CDC studies or from health organizations to crime data. And it just seems obvious that you're not going to have anywhere near the number of reported rapes, criminally speaking, to police, because we know that there's huge fear in doing that. There's huge stigma associated with that. So I don't know I don't deny that the numbers may be wrong from the health organizations, but my point is saying that they're wrong because many of these rapes were not reported to police is absolutely the wrong way to go about proving that.
You're making a mistake, and I think you're just repeating some talking points.
I'm speaking. No, hold on. Let me address that. Let me first address the allegation that I'm repeating talking points. I'm speaking completely extemporaneously off the top of my head. There are no talking points I'm repeating.
Okay, but the fact is that the Bureau of Justice Statistics, they don't report. That's not based on police reports. The police reports figures, and FBI does that, and they're much lower. The National Crime Survey is a meticulously designed survey that asks people about victimization.
Okay, that's fair. I was not referring to that particular one. That's fair. So generally speaking, though, I think you and I would agree that we know a lot about why the number of reported rapes to police would not be anywhere close to the number reported. Okay, fair enough. Okay.
And let me add this. Rape research is very difficult.
Right.
And it's very hard to get it right. And that's why, since I wrote Who Stole Feminism, out of respect for victims, out of concern for having good policies to direct scarce resources, let's have as the state-of-the-art research. What I find is we just don't get it. What we get is a lot of research that's been motivated by started with feminist theorists that seem to be eager to find the smoking gun on the patriarchy and to find huge numbers that something like 1 in 4 women, that was the original claim, on college campus was raped. Well, that's an epidemic. But when you look at the study, you see that it was very poorly designed. And a lot of us, including not just me, criminologists and sociologists, were very critical of Mary Koss when she did that study. It's never gone away. And the CDC is using it, now it's in the government they're using. The Bureau of Justice Statistics has not been politicized. It's the best place to go.
But so then what, I guess, would be my question. If it's true that rape is a huge problem, but not quite as huge as a particular study says, then what as a society should we be doing differently around rape?
Well, I think that, first of all, right now, because of the, I would say, sort of zealotry on the campus, there's a massive focus on sexual violence at Oberlin College and Swarthmore, and relatively little on places where women are far more at risk in urban centers, high crime areas. Rape, like, it sort of tracks with other crimes, and so if you have a lot of violence, you will have a lot of violence to women, especially. So that is being ignored. And there was a wonderful article recently in the New York Times by a statistician from, I think, the University of Arizona, who was just saying all of this resource are going to these mostly very elite campuses, and we are ignoring women in poor communities who are at far more risk. So that's number one.
But I don't understand how that correlates with the broader study. So let's see if I can kind of reframe us to maybe drill down on this. If we have studies from the CDC about how many people are being raped in the country, right? And you assert that actually there are far fewer rapes than those asserted by the CDC in reality. How does that get you to saying, well, because there are fewer rapes than what the CDC reports, we should focus on rape in urban areas instead of on college campuses?
No,
I don't see how that follows.
I didn't say that. I said what I said
Yeah.
was that if you have good data, there are a number of things that helps you. It helps you direct scarce resources in the right direction. So we would want to make sure that we have more resources, more programs going to women at the greatest risk. That's number one. Number two, if you have good data, you're able to find out what works. You're able to find out what works and what doesn't. Now, there is a problem of sexual predators on campus, but the numbers haven't changed. We've had all these programs, but the feminists keep churning out the same numbers, so there's no way to tell what works. There might be some programs that are effective and that could bring whatever the number is, it could bring it down. We have no way to do that if we have specious statistics, and we do.
So your priority is let's just get the most accurate statistics possible, so then we can actually put our rape prevention dollars or labor hours or whatever the case would be towards the issue in a way that will have the most prominent effect on rape reduction. It's a pragmatic point of view, you're saying.
It's an example. I can think of a dozen things that I would do if I were, had to allocate the resources. But the first thing I would want would be good information, not advocacy data. I wouldn't want propaganda that was generated by ideologues who had a different agenda. They have an agenda to implicate the average man in a social atrocity. The average man is not a predator, not a rapist.
So you actually believe that a lot of the statistics you find to be faulty, the underlying catalyst is simply a desire to make men look like they're bad people?
Well, I think that some of the ideologues, as I will call them, I think they do think of masculinity as toxic. They fail to make a critical distinction between pathological masculinity, which exists, but healthy masculinity is far more normal. Most young men, boys and young men exhibit a healthy masculinity. They don't prey on weaker people, they protect them. They don't destroy, they build. Pathologically, masculine men do the opposite. They are a problem. And there are some pathological women, but a lot of the violence, most of the violence is by this dysfunctional group of males. But it's one thing to say that most vicious, violence is carried out by men, and to say that all men are violent. It seems to me they don't say all men are violent, but they act as though the average man is a proto-predator. And a young man going to college today, he's likely to be treated as a potential predator, and the young women are potential survivors. This is absurd, and as I said, it's counterproductive. It won't help victims.
All right, well, you have certainly said it all. We've been speaking with Christina Hoff Sommers, resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. Thank you for being on with me.
Thank you.